Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Gamemax View. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so on today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Gamemax View. This is a new case from Gamemax for 2019 going into 2020 and is a mid-tower case with a tremendous amount of support for various fan cooling and water cooling options. So let's go through it and see if it ticks all the boxes that you may require for your build. Okay, so the first thing which is pretty much obvious from first glances is we've got RGB. Now this case has got a lot of RGB built in straight out of the box. First of all, you've got RGB illuminated sides, and that is on both sides of the chassis. Also included as part of the package are the 3 Gamemax RGB fans, or addressable RGB fans. Now these are the new style fans with the kind of strange configuration on the fan blades, which is designed to push more air at lower RPMs, and actually I think it looks pretty darn nice. These fans are known as the Gamemax dual ring ARGB fans, and you can actually buy these as a separate option. If you want to put more of them in, you can add to the system, and they are a relatively cost-effective purchase, anywhere from $7.99 upwards per fan. Now all of this RGB, or addressable RGB, is controlled from a built-in controller, which again comes included with the case, but also has a pass-through. So if you've got a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB header on your motherboard, you can plug that in and take control from there. But if you want to control it yourself manually and you've got maybe a slightly older motherboard without those features, then there's a button on the top of the case which you can press, which you can cycle through the various addressable RGB options. If for some reason you've bought this case and you don't like RGB, which would be a little bit weird because this is kind of focused a lot on that, you can press and hold the button and it will turn the addressable RGB off altogether, giving you a very kind of stealthy look. But for me, I like the RGB, so quick press and we've got our addressable RGB back on. So let's take a tour around the case and we'll go through some of the options and see some sizes and specs. So front of the case first of all. Now obviously you can tell this is a bit of a reflection magnet and also a little bit of a fingerprint magnet. This is tempered glass and it's 4mm glass all throughout the build, and actually the glass itself is very heavy, and is one of the things that struck me first of all when I took off some of the side panels. You realise just how strong and how bulky this glass is. So maybe if you're building a PC for a slightly younger audience or somewhere where it's going to be maybe a lot of traffic or it's potentially going to get damaged, with this thicker toughened glass it should stand the test of time. Moving around to the side, we've got a full-size glass side panel, again 4mm tempered glass, which is removable. At the moment I've still got the film on there, I haven't peeled that off as of yet, so maybe I should do that now. And there you go, you can see the full panel. It's a really nice panel, very strong. So to save all the reflections, let's take this thing off now so you can get a better look at the insides. Now this side panel is held on in a slightly unusual way, whereas it kind of rests on a ledge at the bottom here, and there isn't actually a great deal holding it in place. So when you've removed the screws, do be a little bit careful. Now, as you can see, the panel is a kind of a smoke tint, and already is actually picking up a lot of greasy fingerprints on this. There is actually a lining on the inside as well, which I haven't taken off yet. And the glass is surrounded only on 2 edges by it looks like aluminium or possibly steel frame, which possibly is removable. Let's see. Yeah, so that will come on, or will come off rather. It is glued in place in a couple of places. So if you are taking it off and you're holding it just by the side panel, do be careful in case it comes off. Definitely use both hands. So there we go, with the side panel removed we can see inside and see what the layout is like. So this is designed for ITX, micro ATX, ATX and extended ATX. For me personally, I was thinking a build like this, extended ATX is going to be your best option. I've gone ahead and put the mounting pillars in on the furthest sides for the larger board, and you've got cutouts here for cable management which do match up really nicely with that extended ATX form factor. If you're using a slightly smaller board, you may find that the cables are going to be stretched over or showing more than you'd like initially. But again, it's got flexibility. You can actually use pretty much any size board in there that you wish. So that's motherboard discussed. Let's talk about the cooling options. Now this case has got a lot of cooling options. So let's go through the fan mounts to start with. So at the rear, we've got a single space for a 120mm fan. In the roof area, there's space for 3 120mm fans. No options for 140mm, unfortunately, on this one. Only 120s, but 360mm of cooling should be more than enough for most people. There is a little bit of width on either side, so if you do plan on using a radiator and you're trying to tuck wires down the sides, then you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. Now the top of the case also has a magnetic filter running along the full length of the 360mm, so if you are using that as an intake area rather than using the front area, which we'll get onto in a little bit why you may want to do that, but if you're using the top as an intake to get the air into the case, then it is going to be fully filtered. So moving through to the front of the case. Now the front of the case also has room for 3 120mm fans, as you've seen from the front view, and unfortunately it doesn't appear that there's actually an option to put anything larger than that in there. So if I take off this front panel, and you'll see why I was suggesting that you may want to use the top as your intake. So the front panel, as you can see, is a complete glass panel. The only intakes you've got are, there is a strip that runs all the way along from the top to bottom on both sides, so that's your air intake. There's also a air intake scoop at the top and also at the bottom. Now again, this is going to be completely unfiltered. There is no filtration whatsoever for this front intake. So you may want to switch the fans around and have that possibly as an exhaust and have some intake on the top. Again, there's the flexibility and options there. You can mount fans pretty much wherever you want to. So also on the front, we've got, well, on the side more so, we've got another 2 mounting areas here for 120mm fans, very similar to the likes of the Sharkoon case behind me. In Win cases, there's quite a few cases now that are starting to do this to give you a little bit more option. So again, depending where your PC is going to be, if it's going to be on show somewhere, maybe like on a sideways on angle, you might want to put the fans, take the 3 at the front, put 1 maybe at the rear for an exhaust, and have 2 there as an intake, possibly with a radiator. Now the good thing about that, if you do put it on the side area, there is actually a removable magnetic filter in the rear panel to allow air to come through, but be nicely filtered as it does. Unfortunately on the front there isn't an option for installing 140mm fans, although there are some additional holes which have been cut, but looking at it, it doesn't look like 140mm fans will fit in there, so that doesn't look like to be a straightforward job, possibly a DIY task at a later date. So that's pretty much the cooling taken care of, although at the bottom, where you've got this full-length basement, there are some openings in it, which again is a good thing because the lower fan at the bottom, the 120mm fan, approximately half of it, or just over half of it, is actually going to be cooling this lower basement. So in the basement is your power supply, and also there's a mounting area for 2 traditional 3.5-inch mechanical drives, or if you want to do a couple of SSDs in the caddies that are in there. But again, for reasons which we'll go into a little bit later, you maybe only want to put 1 3.5-inch drive in there, but we'll get onto that a little bit more later. Again, ventilation, so we've got an exit part here, so if you've got a nice power supply, you can see the logos and what have you on the side of it, or maybe if you wanted to add some more RGB down there to have a little bit of a extra RGB flare, then you could do. You've got holes at the bottom for routing through your cables, and this whole section here is very strong, very sturdy, and possibly a good place to maybe put some other things, maybe a water pump or some other kind of decorative thing inside your PC. I know some people like to do modifications, maybe you want to put a large transformer or a stormtrooper or something like that in there. Again, very solid, and you could secure it there quite easily. So that pretty much wraps up the inside, so let's spin it around and take a look at the rear. So from the rear of the chassis, again, this is actually one of the areas which I particularly like, which is odd, but it's a very flat and smooth rear, so for me that is fantastic. The I/O blanking plates are all separate and removable with screws in there, so if you want to take them out and then put them back in at a later date, you can do. So for dual graphics card solutions or triple slot devices, these are going to be no problems whatsoever. Nice to see. You've got the mounting area for a 120mm fan, which has got a very slight amount of adjustment, maybe about 10mm up or down, so not really a lot of adjustment, but there is some option there. All these edges have been nicely rounded off, so when you're putting your motherboard backplate in, you're not going to have any problems or any cut fingers there. At the bottom we've got our standard location for the power supply, and the power supply and the chassis itself is actually raised off the deck about 30mm or about an inch or so, so you can get airflow underneath. Now there is actually a filter as well underneath, a removable filter, which actually we could go ahead and show you now. So on the base we've got the two sections here which house the addressable RGB strips, which do not appear to be user serviceable in any way. Possibly with a little bit of DIY you could take those off and do something with them, but they're not intentionally set up for any kind of user intervention or servicing. The feet are a slightly bizarre thing in my mind. They're just plastic molded feet. There's no rubber on them whatsoever, so there's no kind of anti-vibration steps made here. Whether that's going to be a deal breaker for some, I guess maybe, but it's quite easy to cut some small rubber squares just to put under the feet if that is a concern. The filter on the bottom, it would have been nice to have seen a proper removable tray type filter, but again, this isn't too bad, and it's a relatively flexible but easy to use device. These sorts of things are not the easiest to do single-handedly, so we'll have a go. Nope, two hands it is. So these fold in. I am not a great fan of these type of filters, if I'm completely honest, and for a case of this kind of price point, which we'll get into in a little bit, it is a little bit of a shame to see this. As you can see, I'm struggling with this now. But again, hopefully it's one of those kind of things that you're not going to have to be cleaning or doing too much to. Generally, if you just lie the PC down with a vacuum attachment, give that a clean, that should be more than enough. So you probably won't need to remove it unless it does get either damp or dirty or whatever, but you shouldn't have to give it much thought at all. So what we've got the front panel off, let's take another look at these fans. Now, these fans are actually pretty special looking. There's a kind of a dual fan design, so you've got a inner fan which has got a slightly different offset blade to the outside. The theory behind this is they can spin slower and be quieter but still push a lot of air. This does actually bring me on to another topic, which is the fan hub. Now notice I did say fan hub, not fan controller. So included with this in the RGB hub, the fan hub also can connect up to 6 fans, but there's no speed control, so they are going to be a fixed speed. So depending on the fans you actually install, with these ones it's absolutely fine. They spin at what I would estimate around about 800 to 900 RPM, so they're not particularly fast spinning, so they don't generate a lot of noise, but there is no control over them, so they are fixed. Although the fans themselves individually are equipped with the 3-pin adjustable RGB header, which is the traditional thing, and also a 3-pin PWM style header as well. So you haven't got PWM control over the fans, but you can still plug them into a motherboard fan header and take control that way. So if you've got a motherboard with a lot of fan headers, there's no reason why you couldn't have more control. Plug these straight into the motherboard and control them through the motherboard software. So let's move around to the back. So on the back, again, this is the section for ventilation, very similar again, like I said, to the In Win design cases, the Charcoon case, that kind of thing. The case has got thumb screws, and actually all the metal on this seems to be very well made, very stiff. There's no kind of wobbly panels. There's a little bit of flex there, but not a great deal. The filter, which is in here, similar design to the one on the base, but it is magnetic, much like the top one. So again, quite easy to remove. There are location lugs in there, which match up with the lugs in the grill. So you can match it up and it's not going to fall around anywhere. So that's quite a nice thing to see. Okay, so let's take a look at the rear. So this is where it starts getting a little bit more interesting. Well, for some of you it may be. So let's go through the I/O first of all. So this is the I/O section here on this side, and all the wiring comes down quite nice and neatly. Talking of the I/O, at the front we've got the power button. Followed by that you have a hard drive and power LEDs. Next to that you've got your headset and microphone jacks, a pair of USB 3.0 ports, and your RGB control button. All of that is pre-wired, ready to go, and comes down in this nice bundle. It's when you get down to here, this is where it starts getting a little bit fussy for my liking. So this is the fan hub, and also the RGB hub stroke controller. So all the wiring from the individual fans, which is at the front, you've got 2 wires from each one, which go into here. So the more fans you've got, the more mesh you're going to have and the more cable management you're going to have to do. So for me personally, this fan hub, it was originally stuck here. I moved it forward just to try and make up a little bit of room and also to clear this area and also to try and stop some of the wires going across this section. But what I think is probably going to be the best bet is to remove this. It's actually on a adhesive pad, and what I would probably end up doing is to remove the top drive bay and stick that in the drive bay, and then we can tuck all the wires in there and we can forget about them. Again, not quite the most elegant solutions. It probably does need a little bit of cable management to finish that off. And actually another thing I noticed then is most of these cables actually have plastic caps on them, so if you've got any wires which you're not using, you're not going to be left with pins or live pins, so that's kind of nice. But I think for me now, that does work a lot better, and especially if you're having a couple of fans here as an exhaust or intake for the filtration, then having all of this section free and clear of cables is going to be really good. Although it does reduce your ability to put a 3.5-inch drive or two 3.5-inch drives in this bottom section, but realistically it's 2019 going into 2020. Mechanical drives are starting to become a thing of the past. I would hope most people doing a build in this would be probably looking towards SSDs and also towards NVMe type drives which will be mounted onto the motherboard. So realistically this area here I can imagine being, for most people's setups, is going to be clear, so you wouldn't have to worry about anything there. Moving along a little bit further, where the power supply goes, this is a standard ATX power supply in here, just an old one, so I can fire up the fans. But again, we've got quite a nice bit of room there to store all your spare cables, that kind of thing. If you're using a modular power cable, then obviously that's not going to be a problem anyway. But if you're using a semi-captive or captive power supply, there's plenty of room down there to store all your cables. As is the same with most of this in the back section. You've got, I would say, what looks like about an inch of depth. Yeah, just over an inch of depth, so closer to 30 millimeters of depth there for hiding and storing cables. There's lots of cable tie-off points, and I'll say it's all nicely cut. There's no sharp edges for you to get caught on. Again, you've got another section here for mounting drives, so this will take two 2.5-inch drives or one 3.5-inch drive. So if you did want to use that space for your controller, hub, and you wanted to still add two 3.5-inch drives, you could put one there and you could put one there. Although the 3.5-inch drive there, because this is a metal bracket on metal with a rotational disc, you may find that introduces some noise into the system, so possibly not ideal. But certainly for two 2.5-inch drives, that is going to be perfect. So if you do want to stock it up with drives, you shouldn't have too many issues at all. Okay, so that pretty much wraps that up. I'm going to now put it all back together and go through my final thoughts and also discussion on the price. Okay, so there we are, we're back to square one. This is pretty much how we started this video. So my thoughts and conclusions. Right, first of all, actually let's get the price out. So the price at the moment from some of the UK suppliers, we're looking at like £75 for this case. So I've got to be honest with you, I'm in two minds. The kind of £70 to £80 mark, we're hitting a territory which Gamemax traditionally doesn't always compete in. There's other cases on the market, such as the Meshify, which is extremely popular, which arguably would offer better cooling. Obviously it doesn't come with the included RGB, so if we kind of look at the RGB components, so RGB strips, arguably £10 a piece. The RGB fans, as we discussed, about £8 each, so that's 24, what we're looking at, 45. Take into account the fan hub controller, throw in another tenner. So we're looking at almost £50 worth of value added to this case with the RGB components. Realistically, you probably wouldn't pay that straight off for those. The additional fans, maybe you'd see that as a suitable purchase, but if you're going to buy an RGB component setup, possibly you'd be looking elsewhere. But having said that, it is added value. We've got some filtration there. We've got a slightly quirky front section with no filtration, but again, it's workable. There is some filtration from these side panels, but again, it's not optimal. So for the £75 they're asking, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure on this one. It's a very strong, very sturdy, very solid case, and it does tick a lot of boxes, and it's certainly got a lot of flexibility for you to add loads of fans, loads of radiators, a massive graphics card. You can get graphics cards in here of up to 350mm, so that is fantastic. One weird thing I did notice in the packaging is that it said that it will support a CPU fan of up to 150mm, which immediately I thought, well, that's actually quite small. That is actually smaller than the Arctic Freezer 34, the Arctic 33. It's smaller than most of the 120mm coolers. Probably the smallest one that will fit into that category would be the Gamemax, or Gamemax rather, the 400. Things like the Cooler Master 212 Evo, that kind of thing, are about 155. So I did actually measure it, and I think that is possibly an error on the box, which maybe we can address. I will be doing a full build in this with my existing system just to give it a fair go and see what it's actually like. So we'll find out if that is going to be a restriction, but first measuring it, it looks like we've got about 165 to 170 mils worth of depth there for a cooling fan. So hopefully that is a mistake on the box and is not going to impede the build or anything we want to do with the build. But again, something to certainly bear in mind if you're considering this case. So there we go, there are my thoughts on it. Again, I wouldn't say this is a run out and buy it type case. If you like the design, you like the looks, there aren't a great deal of cases with this kind of look on the market, especially at this price point, but there are other compelling options at this price point. So I'm not going to give any recommendations here. I'm going to let you guys make up your own minds, and also feel free to let us all know what you think about the case in the comment section below. I actually, in this particular one where I'm kind of on the fence, I would love to have your input to see what you think about it and see what your thoughts are. So anyway, this has been the Gamemax View ARGB case. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next video and hopefully in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.